from in this one big explosion, animal phyla being the basic body styles that we have today, body forms. Now, it's incredible, as you see, none of them look like they come from this planet. We don't have anything from this era left except trilobites that look kind of, horseshoe crabs that look kind of like something that existed back then. But nonetheless, this is the story of life on Earth up to this point. This is the truth. Okay, next one. Okay, here's the timeline of it, so you get it in your mind what happened. We have point of coalescing back here, 4.5 billion years ago. And we have just seething lava, that's why it's red. It's being bombarded by asteroids, comets, whatever. And then at 4 billion years ago, where you would least expect with the bombardment still going on, prokaryotes appear. Prokaryotes, they carry down through. Prokaryotes, 3.5 billion years. Prokaryotes, 3 billion, 2.5 billion prokaryotes. And here at 2 billion, suddenly, we have the beginnings of the eukaryotes with the prokaryotes, little black dots in the circles. Okay, because those are the nuclei. 2 billion years prokaryote, eukaryote, 1.5 prokaryote, eukaryote, 1 billion prokaryote. Right here, Ediacaran fauna at 600 million years ago. Now, Ediacarans, notice that the prokaryotes and eukaryotes carry right down to today, just as they were back here. Keep that in mind. Anyway, Ediacaran, another Ediacaran right here, and right here with this trilobite is the Cambrian explosion. See those two little lines right there? That represents the 10 million years that we were talking about. You see how incredibly brief it was relative to all of this. It's overnight, practically. And then we have the full panoply of complex life following thereafter in only the last half billion years, 500 million years, 1/9 of what's come before. So life is really fairly new, complex life is rather. Life is very old, but complex life is fairly new. And what we are taught is that all of this life developed by a process called macroevolution. This is what the Darwinian paradigm postulates. That macroevolution is sea worms turning into fish, fish turning into amphibians, amphibians turning into reptiles, and reptiles turning into birds and mammals and all of that. Gills turning into lungs, fins turning into forelimbs, scales turning into skin. That is macroevolution. It has to be that way for the Darwinian paradigm to work. Where did the idea come from? Well, it comes from a concept known as microevolution. Microevolution. That is what Darwin saw. Next slide, please. Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands, as you know, and he noticed some finches that are called now Darwin's finches, and turtles, tortoises, that had some different physiological traits based on the islands that produced different feeding environments for them. Different beaks, different shells for the turtles. Now, these are not Darwin finches. These are honey creepers from Hawaii. Hawaii being about twice as old as the Galapagos, so you see much more distinctive microevolution. Micro meaning evolution in parts of the body. Microevolution is a very wide-ranging trait across all species. Very easy to see that produced. As we see, these birds have to feed on nectar and insects, fruit, and seed. You get different designs as you have different needs as you feed. But basically, they're still the ancestral honey creeper. They're still honey creepers. In their bodies, they still reproduce the same. They still digest the same. They haven't changed. There has been no macroevolution, no change in the body, turning it, a honey creeper into, say, a hawk or something like that. You see what I'm saying? There is no macroevolution. There is no evidence anywhere of macroevolution. Not in the fossil record, not in real time. Nowhere can we see it in any species that are alive today. The Darwinists keep postulating, as Darwin himself did, if this can occur in a few million years, they assume, they postulate that the whole body changes can occur over the course of cosmic time. It makes sense. It's a good guess. I would have made that guess myself had I been standing in Darwin's shoes. It's just that it's wrong. And Darwin himself said, if you cannot find the transitional species that my theory postulates, we have to assume it's wrong. It's been 140 years. They're still looking. Darwin was wrong. If he was here alive today, I think standing with me, he'd be man enough to step up here and say, yeah, it looks like I was wrong. But the Darwinists can't do that because as they stand wherever they are, they're hearing this. And that's the creationists banging on the door, saying if you're wrong, we want in and we want an equal seat at the table. And so the Darwinists have to pretend that they're right, even though they know that they're wrong, because nobody wants the creationists coming in on an equal footing. Not even I do that. But nonetheless, this is the situation as it is, in real time, in real life. Okay, next one. Okay, here's another timeline I want you to look at. We have prokaryotes, eukaryotes, Eachrone fauna, and the Cambrian explosion right to here. Now this is, again, is the whole panoply of complex life extending outward. Notice that it is dominated by 5 major extinction events. There have been several minor extinction events as well. This is when an asteroid strikes and just destroys the place. All right, we're talking for majors, we're talking 80 to 90% of everything alive getting wiped out. 80 to 90%. Minors are around 50%. So, as you see, the last one here was the Cretaceous of 65 million years ago that took out the dinosaurs. Now, you would think if the Darwinian paradigm worked, that you would see it clearly after each of these events. Why? Because the slate is wiped clean. I mean, there's nothing there. There's nothing left. And what happens? The ecological niches are filled fairly rapidly. You have a few thousand years after where not much happens, where the planet is allowed to restabilize, and then suddenly, boom, you get the niches being filled like they were during the Cambrian explosion. You have actually a series of Cambrian explosions here. Well, how do the Darwinists deal with that? They come up with something called punctuated equilibrium, which is an addendum to Darwinism. They say that Darwinism works when it can work, but when it can't work, somehow life itself, the surviving 10 to 20%, know that it's time to floor the accelerator of evolution and start speciating like crazy, those survivors. So the 10 to 20% turn themselves into thousands of new species in a very short time. What punctuated equilibrium really means is this. Normally, a piece of popcorn, a kernel of popcorn, will pop itself into its next step up the evolutionary ladder, which is a piece of popcorn. Not a kernel, but a piece of popcorn. But during the times when punctuated equilibrium is in effect, one kernel of popcorn pops itself into the whole giant bowl you get for $10 at the movie. That's what they're asking you to believe, and it is in fact what you do believe. Because again, you don't expect them to lie to you, you don't expect them to have an agenda. But they do. Punctuated equilibrium is another tornado sweeping through a junkyard. So, what does it mean? Well, what it means is this. Life is being brought to Earth. Earth is being terraformed. Life doesn't evolve on Earth. It comes here whole and intact, males and females, just as it did during the Cambrian explosion. And things stay, for the most part, like they are. They have some degree of change, and it's called microevolution. But they stay as they are until they go extinct when something wipes them out. And then new things are brought. And whatever is acceptable to the planet at that time is what seems to be brought. What I say in the book, it's as if cosmic dump trucks are out there flying around. And we get the word, Earth needs a new dose of life. And here's what the atmosphere will tolerate at this time. And we get brought whatever we need. That is what it looks like, that we're being terraformed by something that can look at 2 to 4 billion years and take the long view. Now, someone might argue that that's God. Well, it might be. Someone might argue that it was God who created life in the first place because of the impossibility of the natural process that we're taught is the way it happened. That may well be. I don't know. I'm not a creationist. I can just tell you that there is room for a prime mover in there somewhere because something is going on at a much, much higher level than we're being told about. For sure. The facts are pretty obvious. All right, now we're going to move from all this. This is the history of life. We're going to move now into mankind. Now notice, if you will, see this guy right here that represents us? Where do we fit in the scheme, this timeline that we're talking about? If you take his lead foot and take his big toe, and if you shave a millimicron off of his big toenail, that's how long we've been here. Very, very, very new to the planet. Keep that in mind. Okay, next slide. Now we're going to have a blank here, so hit the next one. Okay, let's just take a look at this and absorb it for a moment. Okay, now this says in about as small a space as I think it can be done, millions of words and thousands of volumes, which are trying to explain why everything else on Earth, everything, is eat, survive, reproduce, and only we can stand there and think, what's it all about? What's it all about? We all know what this means. Well, what's it all about? What we're told is this, that everything evolves, including us, and that we evolved from this guy right here, that we share a common ancestor with this guy right here at around 8 to 5 million years ago. That between that period, 8 to 5 million years, there was a branching, and that we share a common ancestor. These guys went on to become gorillas, chimps, orangutans, and gibbons, and we became us. All right? Now, what's the likelihood? Well, this guy does have ancestors extending way back 20 to 30 million years, the Miocene apes. We're talking proconsul, Egyptopithecus, Ramapithecus, Gigantopithecus, about 20 of them. So he's got his ancestors, and he could easily have microevolved down to here the way he is, and so, the gorillas and the chimps could have been an extension of that long-term microevolutionary process, no problem. But we don't seem to have any ancestors until we appear at around 120,000 years ago as Cro-Magnon, which we're going to see. Okay, next slide, please. Now, why do we say 4 million years ago, 5 to 8 million years ago? Because we know we're upright walking at around 4 million years ago. We know something is, and here's the proof. These are the tracks at Laetoli in Tanzania. You may have heard about them, discovered by Mary Leakey in 1978, a team of hers in 1978. That's her right there. These are the tracks laid down by a pair of hominids. These are scientifically considered upright walking people like us, our ancestors, our predecessor hominids. And we see that there's a larger male, and we think a smaller female. The smaller track is the female. You can see the comparison there. Now, this foot is not quite a human foot, but it's pretty close. It's certainly carrying something fully upright at 3.5 million years ago. So we extrapolate, if it's this upright, they had to be pretty upright at around 4 million years ago, so we rounded off at that. So we have this in Tanzania. Next slide, please. And then we have at 3.2 million, this is it, this is the scene, this is how those tracks occurred. There was an ash fall out of a volcano, they went walking along, and then there was another ash fall which covered it, and then 3.5 million years later, they're discovered. But this is the scene as it is imagined, and in all likelihood how it occurred. Now, whether the creatures look like this or not, that's open to speculation, and we'll talk about that. Now, the next slide. 3.2 million years ago, Lucy. We've all heard of Lucy. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Apar Valley, Ethiopia, 1974. Donald Johanson, 40% of a skeleton. A tremendous amount in archaeological terms, anthropological terms. By mirror imaging the bones, we get about 80% of her. We know a lot about her. She was about 3'6" to 3'8" tall. She was small, very diminutive. But her bones are so much bigger and more robust than any of our bones. If this is a human this size, the arm bone is going to be about the thickness of that as opposed to the thickness of this. Very much more robust than we are. The head is the head, can't tell it from hers, but we have the heads of others like her. Basically a chimpanzee head. Basically a chimpanzee on an upright body. But notice we have a pelvis, we have a hip joint, we have a knee joint. All surprisingly human, surprisingly upright walking. So we know she was upright walking. Her arms were extraordinarily long, however. This fingertip right here should be down here. They always fudge these arms because they're too long. Notice that he put the shoulder up way higher than it belongs so that you don't get a sense of how that the arm, really the fingertip, should be down around here because they're trying to make their finds look more human than they really are. Okay, next slide, please. Lucy is one of the 4 Australopithecines, the first 4 types of prehumans. This is Lucy. Australopithecus afarensis, Africanus, robustus, Boise. All right, 4. These 2, afarensis and Africanus, upright walking chimps. These 2, robustus and Boise, upright walking gorillas. You can see it. They even have the sagittal crests, which modern-day gorillas have.